Hi, I'm Linda Ulleseit, and I'm the author of The Aloha Spirit, coming this August from She Writes Press. The book is about a woman who lives in Honolulu, and she is trying to find the Aloha Spirit within herself because she knows in order to be successful at giving it to other people, she needs to find it within herself first.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, I'm Barbara Linn Probst, also with She Writes, which is how I met Linda. And my book, Queen of the Owls, I hope it's forward, not backward,
Yeah.
was actually published a couple of months ago. And it's the story of a woman's search for self framed around the art and life of iconic American painter Georgia O'Keeffe, and specifically O'Keeffe's little-known time in Hawaii, where she produced 20 paintings. So Linda and I discovered that we both have this Hawaii theme, and we thought it would be fun to just have a conversation and let you eavesdrop. And we have not scripted this. We're just going to talk about Hawaii and aloha and mahalo and all of that good stuff. So Linda, what is the aloha spirit as a thing?
Well, first of all, let me give the disclaimer that I live in California. I've never lived in Hawaii. I'm not Hawaiian. So my interpretation is going to be different than other people's interpretations. And as I started talking to people about it, I realized that that's what it is. Everybody has their own interpretation. What got me thinking about it, the book is inspired by my husband's grandmother. She did grow up in Hawaii, as did her husband, and my mother-in-law was born there. So what impressed me about my husband's grandmother was that she was the most loving, welcoming person I ever knew. Anybody who could come was welcome in her house. I could show up at her house with 10 people for dinner and she'd be fine with it. And I also knew that she had grown up with a very hard childhood. She hadn't had an easy life. So I thought, what is it that brings her from that difficult life to this place of being this warm, wonderful person? And I decided that that was what the Aloha Spirit was, that she was able to find it within herself.
It's just it's very cool because both of our books really are about transformation. Mm-hmm. My protagonist begins as someone who kind of lives in her head, and she needs to journey towards embodiment, towards wholeness, towards embracing her sensuality, which is a journey of transformation, like in your book, Linda, which is sort of cool. And I actually did go to Hawaii. It wasn't specifically for the research, although it turned out that way. This is one of the wild things that happened. When I was working on the book, I got an inbox thing about Writers' Conference in Kauai, which is like a really amazing place. So I was like, I have to go. I have to do this. So I'll just share one of the things that being in Hawaii made me understand that informed the book. So O'Keeffe is known for the Southwest, which is a very dry heat. Everything is red, brown, arid. And when I was actually in Kauai, and I felt the heavy, moist sensuality of the air, a different kind of heat. And it was amazing because that really spoke to my book. I would never have understood that without being physically in Kauai, although of course, O'Keeffe actually, her time was mostly in Maui, but it worked. It was good enough. It was good enough for me. Have you actually been to Hawaii, Linda?
I have. I've been to Kauai. I've been to Oahu. I've been to the island of Hawaii. Been to Maui. But Kauai is one of my favorite places. And my husband's grandmother actually was born on Kauai.
Oh, cool.
So she lived most of her life in Honolulu, but she was born on Kauai. Beautiful place. Beautiful place.
Well, the other thing that's kind of interesting, and I'll just share about my book, because it kind of dovetails with the Aloha Spirit notion. And early, the protagonist is studying O'Keeffe's Hawaii paintings for her dissertation, completely mental. And she learns that O'Keeffe went to Hawaii at a time in her life when she was completely stuck. her art was stagnant. She was repeating herself. Her husband had been unfaithful. She was depressed, etc. So when she was there for 9 weeks in 1939, she found a kind of renewal, rebirth, if you will. So my protagonist is searching for her own Hawaii, the place where, or the means through which she can be renewed. And actually, a prior title of Queen of the Owls was Her Own Hawaii, but we thought it would sound like it was a travelogue or something. So that got canned along with 10 other titles. So it didn't work. but this notion of finding her own Hawaii, which is what O'Keeffe found at just the moment that she needed something fresh. It just kind of reminds me of finding the Aloha spirit.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when I was writing this book, it's something that I meant to do for a long time, and I've been working on it and researching it. And, you take the family story. I've done this before. You take the family story, all of the legends and things that and then you go and you research what was going on, what was life like, and kind of plug in the gaps, right? So I was kind of stuck. I didn't really know where to go with it, because when you take something that's a slice of life and then you have to turn it into a novel with its peaks and valleys, you basically just take a chunk of somebody's life. It's not a novel. You have to make it a novel, right? So I was kind of stuck exactly what I was going to do, how I was going to do that. And my husband and I went to Kauai, and on the side, the less popular side of the island, not Poipu where everybody stays, but there's a place up near, was it Waimea, where they have plantation cottages that you can stay in that are actual plantation cottages, like his grandmother would have grown up in. So we actually went and stayed in a plantation cottage, and it was so inspiring. So like you were talking about being there, now I could write a scene about being in the kitchen with the doors open to the outside and just the vents, without any screens or anything. It wasn't something that I was familiar with. So it was a very inspiring kind of thing to be there. It's very important.
Yeah, I totally get it. People ask me about my writing process. Like, one of the things I'll do is I'll actually get up and act out a scene to feel what the body movements are and what it feels like and all of that. So, these sense impressions that really add a whole layer of authenticity. And it's not a matter of writing descriptive scenes of describing the plants. It's evoking that feeling of being there, which can be through a few details. But it really does, I couldn't agree more. It really brings writing to life. It's so wild. And so I learned a lot of, here's another really wild story. So George O'Keeffe was in Hawaii. It was a time when Hawaii was this big commercial thing, the lurleen and all of these posters about hula dancers and ukuleles and all that stuff. So Dole Pineapple wanted her to paint a picture of a pineapple that they could use in their advertising, and they paid for her to go there. Well, of course, being O'Keeffe, she painted 20 things, none of which was a pineapple, until they finally had to mail her one when she was back in New York, and she did it in New York. But anyway, that's another story. But so here's the cool thing. So this body of work is not very well known, and quite honestly, with a couple of exceptions, they're not her best work. I think she was feeling her way to something through them. But anyway, they're not typically included in major shows. So they were shown together in 1940 by Stieglitz in New York. So I'm Googling George O'Keeffe Hawaii on my browser, and what do I find? But these 20 paintings are going to be exhibited together for the first time in 80 years, 20 minutes from where I live. That's in incredible. 2 weeks. It wasn't like I just missed it.
Right, that would be me.
Right? It wasn't like in California where you live. It was the Botanical Garden, 20 minutes from my house. So it was wild. It was like a message. So of course I went, I talked to the curator. The other thing they did, because they chose to do this at the Botanical Garden rather than a big museum, they had another exhibit, a sister exhibit of the actual plants from Hawaii that she had painted. So it was really interesting to look at, let's say, her painting of heliconia and then see the actual flower. So
When you see the pictures of the plants, sometimes you can't believe they could be real, because
yeah,
some of the tropical plants are just, they look so odd, and then you see them in real life.
I
It's
know.
beautiful. Yeah.
The colors, right? Just amazing. Of course, what she did was very interesting because, you know, when you're in Hawaii, like if you look at the banana, what's that called? Banana, pink banana, you don't ever see it isolated. It's surrounded by all this lush green stuff. But she took away the context and just let the thing itself be visible, almost like a dancer on the edge of a cliff. That's how it, and she painted these incredible waterfalls. I think it's called the Iao Valley. Am I saying it right?
Io.
Oh my, sorry?
Io. Yeah.
Anyway, so extraordinary. So anyway, it's part of what you and I are talking about, of seeing the real places and objects, and it brings another, I mean, it goes into the emotions, and it's again, it's not a travelogue, but it adds to the texture of our writing.
Well, I think that I don't think your book or my book would be the same if it wasn't Hawaii, if it was someplace else. So it's definitely something special about the Hawaii piece of it. I know when I was starting to research my book, or trying to, you know, develop it more, I realized that the woman I knew was very devout Catholic, but she grew up with all of the Hawaiian gods, and there were Asian, you know, Korean and people in the family, Hawaiian people in the family, Chinese people in the family. So she had input from a lot of different cultural backgrounds, spiritual backgrounds. And so finding yourself, you know, would have had a lot to do with faith also. So I had to decide how to do that. Part of it being when her husband is abusive to her. So she's married at this point, she's 19 years old. She has 2 children. Her husband's an alcoholic who's abusing her. So a lot of people who read the book say, oh, well, she should leave him. But it was 1939 and 1940, and
really the same time.
Same time frame, yeah. But Catholics didn't divorce. I remember when I read your book, I realized that it's the same time frame, yeah. But Catholics didn't divorce at that time. It was not an option. So as a writer, I had to put that in to explain to readers who wouldn't understand that was not an option. So that was a difficult thing for her to hold tight to her Catholic faith, but also be looking for the Aloha spirit, which is more of a Hawaiian kind of a thought or a feeling.
I feel like it's universal. It transcends religion. I mean, you could find that in any. That's really cool. So I think I'm not sure if there's a parallel in our books. But my story is contemporary, so it's not about Georgia O'Keeffe. It isn't what do you call that, bio novel fiction? Right. You know what I mean? O'Keeffe doesn't walk across the pages. She's present as the sort of inspiration for my protagonist, who wants to be what she believes O'Keeffe was. This sort of combination of this really austere, independent, sort of Zen-like recluse, and this incredibly sensuous, voluptuous painter of the flowers, you know, woman who posed nude. So she wants to integrate the two sides. And so one of the things I came upon, which was kind of fun. So I did a lot of research learning about O'Keeffe, but I wanted my protagonist, whose name is Elizabeth, to be interpreting the Hawaii paintings, because it's her dissertation. So I don't know what O'Keeffe really meant by these things, right? Right. And no one can ask her. And even if you had asked her, she would have said, look at the paintings, don't talk to me. That was her whole, okay. So I didn't want to get in trouble with O'Keeffe's scholars. So I put the interpretations, which in some cases are a little wild, into Elizabeth's voice. So if anyone was to question my scholarship, I'd say, hey, this is not what I think. This is what Elizabeth thinks. Yeah. So that was how
her dissertation hasn't been proven yet, so I'm safe.
Yeah, I toggled that line in a very interesting way. And the funny thing is, you know, when I started doing this book, I didn't really know much about O'Keeffe, but the more I learned, it's like, oh my God, I could not possibly have written it any other way.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hawaii work was the perfect frame because it's not well known. It's a particular time in her life. It bisected her time devoted to her husband and the time alone, or I mean, even though she still saw him, she right when she came back, she bought her house in Santa Fe when she returned from Hawaii to establish herself. So it really, anyway, it wouldn't have worked if she hadn't gone to Maui.
No. Yeah, it's exactly right. Because you are, it's kind of a strange chunk of her life that is inexplainable, and everybody comes up with their own explanation for how that worked, right? My problem in researching was when Pearl Harbor arrives and my family's living in Hawaii. I had to research, of course, all about Pearl Harbor, but most of what I found was information about the military, what they were doing and how they thought, and how the military reacted, or how the big businesses reacted. There's very little out there about what the average Joe Blow civilian experienced. So I was able to go to Hawaii and pick up some books where there was some, people just talking about living in Hawaii. And I got a little bit that way, but I had to imagine what it was like to be up on Punch Bowl, which is up above Honolulu, looking out over Pearl Harbor, peering through the high rises that would not have been there. And imagine what it would have been like to watch the harbor burn when a relative that you're madly in love with is down there working at Pearl Harbor that day. So it was, being there was, like you said, made it a little more realistic to have you get a feel for that.
Yeah, but what you're making me feel into is that even though maybe you couldn't talk to anybody who had actually been through it, you put the human emotions that you understand from living, you put them into that scene, which is what a human being might feel. Exactly. You don't have to actually have talked to someone who was literally there in order to make the experience authentic on the page.
Right.
Right. So the thing I say in my book is my equivalent. This is that, spoiler alert, my protagonist, she meets this photographer who convinces her that the only way to understand O'Keeffe is to do what O'Keeffe did, which is to pose nude. So of course, when I give these interviews and I talk about all the research, I have to say, no, I did not pose nude. But I actually had no trouble writing those scenes because for whatever reason, I could just feel what it would feel like to take this risk of exposing oneself, of revealing oneself. And I felt like I could capture that emotional quality, even though I had never actually taken my clothes off in front of a photographer. So it's kind of the same.
Right. Well, I had the same experience when I wrote the scenes where her husband was slapping her or abusing her. I've never experienced that. It's not something I'm familiar with, not something I've been exposed to at all. But what I tried to portray was the horrible sense of hurt and betrayal, and how you feel not so much physically hurt, because of course there's that too, but it's the emotional shock and hurt of being betrayed like that, when you think this is the person who loves you and is supposed to be taking care of you. And then the layer on top of that is the fear then for your children. And that is something I could definitely write.
This is like, Linn and I really don't know each other. And like, this is the coolest conversation ever, because we're discovering right before your very eyes that we approach writing the same way.
That's awesome.
And right?
Yes.
And that it's what you described about going deep into the feelings of betrayal and shame and fear. You don't have to ask your husband to slap you around in order to understand what your character would feel.
Right.
Just as I didn't have to literally take my clothes off, which at this age, I'm not sure that would have been that exciting anyway. but it's really interesting to talk with a writer about this process. Yes. And I think that, again, getting back to Hawaii, there's something so sensuous and embodied about being there, and everything, the colors that the atmosphere really supports that risk, that willingness to be embodied while one writes. And it's kind of a cool thing.
It's
Absolutely.
definitely a place that's lends yourself to being creative.
Yeah.
We end up going about every couple of years. We're a lot closer than you are. It's a little bit
Yeah.
easier trip, but we go every couple of years, and it does feel, when it's been a while, it does feel like it's calling to us, like we need to go. It's a place that definitely makes an impact on your heart, and you want to be there. I think that people who haven't been there feel that a little bit too, the mystery and kind of the allure of being at someplace so different, still part of the United States. Some people don't believe that, but still part of the United States, but so very different from what we experience, most of us experience on a day-to-day life.
Yeah. You know, the other thing I found when I was there, everyone's saying mahalo all the time. And that's one of the last words in the book, because as my protagonist, Elizabeth, she makes a mistake. She does some things that maybe were questionable and had a cost. And in the end, she's grateful for all that she's been through, and even for this person who was maybe in some ways a real jerk, and even for her husband who never really understood her and all of this. And she says, mahalo, thank you for helping me be on this journey. So I feel very close to that concept, and in a sort of weird way, by saying it in another language, it has a more evocative feeling than just thanks, which becomes kind of like meaningless. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense, because it connects it to the whole spirit, which you've already portrayed through the book, of what Hawaii means and how it went through, both for Georgia O'Keeffe and for your character.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. You know, and just, I think it might be fun to say a word about our covers as well. We have both
yes.
such interesting covers. So why don't you just show yours and talk about it a little, and then I'll do mine.
My cover, I was excited by the cover because, first of all, you write historical fiction. I don't like the covers, this personal preference. I don't like the covers that have the black and white pictures on the front, or the sepia tone pictures on the front that just announce that it's historical fiction. I'm like, for Hawaii, it has to be colorful. And so
Yeah.
I told the cover designer, I said, well, I want something that is kind of along the lines of those posters that Matson did for Matson Lines and Linn, and all those advertising posters that were kind of the soft watercolor covers that were very colorful, but still very soft. And so they came up with the greens and blues on here. And then they put the steamship in the background, and that's the key clue that it is a historical fiction. So I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, so my cover is, it's hard to tell. I don't know. You can't really see it. Behind the script is one of O'Keeffe's paintings. It's called actually White Iris. It's not a Hawaii painting, but it worked. It's like, I mean, some of the paintings I loved were not suitable, or they wouldn't give you permission, or you couldn't write over them. So we had a search to find a painting that was workable as a cover. But the story I tell people is, I had this idea, and when the designer showed me this cover, I hated it. And luckily my partner and BFF said to me, Barbara, you're out of your mind. This is a great cover. and they were right. But it captures this sort of softness and kind of freedom. Even the script just got something kind of free. Anyway, I do think that covers evoke the kind of story, like, you know, when you see this, it's not going to be dystopian sci-fi,
right?
You know,
right, you know, it did have some of the softness, some of the feeling that you want to evoke from what Hawaii brings. Yeah,
it's kind of it's really, really interesting.
We talked earlier about titles. The first thing that was said to me by the publisher was that they wanted to change the title. Didn't like the title. They thought it sounded like a travel log. And I said, no, you don't understand. So I hadn't had a chance to read it yet. I'm like, you don't understand the Aloha spirit. That's what it's about. That's the theme of the book, is finding the Aloha spirit. Because originally I had titled it Aloha Spirit. So they just said, well, okay, we'll call it the Aloha Spirit.
I think that's better, actually, Linda.
Yeah, all right, that's fine. Yeah, it is better. So I
Yeah.
just had never thought about it, for 5 years writing it or whatever it was. I've been thinking of it one way and then having to change
Yeah.
it. And sometimes you
Yeah.
don't realize right away that it's better, right? Like your cover.
Well, with the title, you would not believe the number of people who've said to me, "Oh, I just love owls." There are no owls in my book. I've said that people don't believe me, that there are no owls. The owl is, of course, her bookworm, owlish intellectual self, and needing to, have this kind of, you think of someone who feels that she's a queen. She's beautiful, she's proud, she's regal, right? So it was, it's had its share of
I like it. I like it. I like the
I
title.
love it. I totally love the title. And actually plagiarized myself because I had used it for something, an academic article a billion years ago. That's a long story, but it was my title. I got to use it. But anyway, yeah, I didn't want to say anything too direct. I wanted it to be a little bit of a mystery. But this has been this is super fun. And, we hope that this has kind of sparked your appetite to look at both of our books a little more closely. You don't have to be an art lover. You don't have to have been through Pearl Harbor. You just have to like a good story.
Yes. And they're both definitely good stories.
Yeah.
We invite everybody to come and embrace our Hawaii by reading our books.
So you can find my website. It's Barbara Linn Probst, one long word, Linn, anyway, hopefully they'll be easy to find. You can also see some pictures of the research I did when I went to visit the places O'Keeffe lived and worked and see some of her paintings. And one of my favorite photographs is me like an inch away from a painting worth $44.4 million.
Wow.
The guard just didn't care. So I was like, okay.
They don't care, right?
Yeah. And what's your website, Linda?
My website is Ulleseit, my last name, ulleseit.com. So you can find everything about my books there.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.